Right. Okay. Welcome everybody to this session. I'm Ashley Friedline, the founder and CEO of Guild. Thanks for joining. We're going to record the session and hopefully share it afterwards with the group. I've yet to figure out whether the file is going to be too big or not, but we'll see. We've allowed 50 minutes in the diary just to give, because you might well have something starting at 4, so we want to finish before then. But if we run out of questions or we've got through everything, then we will happily finish earlier than 50 minutes. Our special guest today is our very own community host, Martin Fincham, who is author of Diary of a Novice, which look, I have here. Looks like which I have read, and I can say is it's really good. I mean, I think it's very accessibly written, very practical, very open and honest, and perhaps most notably is very short as well. I don't know if you can see, but it's pretty thin. I reckon I read it in less than 2 hours, so that was great. I put a link to it to buy it if you want on Amazon in the Guild group. So Martin, just a brief introduction to him. He's had a 30-year career in tech businesses, both as an entrepreneur and a corporate CEO, and has particular experience and expertise in B2B SaaS, in sales and marketing. As far as I can tell, sort of started on his NED journey in 2016 and then took on a few more in 2018, 2020. And so only really 5 years-ish, and now has a portfolio, I think, of 6 or 7 positions or companies. If you want to find out more about him in Guild, you should click on his face or just search in the search icon top right for him, and then you can see in his profile he's got links to like his LinkedIn and his company website and things. So there is a chat function here in Whereby, which you're welcome to post questions to. And also you can post them after the session's finished. Obviously you can't post them in this, in the event platform, but if we don't have time to answer certain questions, then we can, Martin, I think, is happy to answer them in Guild afterwards at his leisure. And you might have some sort of follow-up questions that you forgot to ask during the session, but you can also do that. And I'll post a link. In fact, I'll do that now. Post a link here through to that Guild thread. All right, okay. There we go. So that's just posted it to the chat. That just clicks through to the thread that we're using for this particular session. So I'm going to kick off, Martin, with well, is there anything, first of all, you wanted to say more about either your book or your career? It was a very short version.
No, I think it's best done by others because they keep it nice and short and concise and we don't ramble. I think perhaps the only thing to add to that is the context in which I went into pluralism and building a portfolio career. So for me, being a NED and being a pluralist was not a hobby. It wasn't just a simple add-on to say my day job. It was a very conscious career transition, and I realize that not everybody in this meeting or even on the group kind of has that in mind, right? So if I answer any questions, if I'm a bit too sort of particular to my own experience, please don't hesitate to sort of pull me up on that, and maybe I zoom back a little bit and think more broadly back when I took my first NED role when I was a CEO, sort of cast my mind back to that time rather than always being in the present.
Okay. So I'll kick off with the most common question I think that we hear, and certainly sort of comes up in the group, and it was echoed, I think, by John, who's here. I see now, John. I'm not sure, is it Panchak or anyway? That's a best effort at your surname. But he echoed is about how you get NED positions, and I think probably particularly cracking your first NED position. So there's all sorts of ways you can do it, but just based on your personal experience or other NEDs you've spoken to, how do you get that first position?
Okay, yeah, no, as you say, it is the thing that I get asked most often. I guess I normally start the conversation really going back to the why behind the question in terms of what is the intent, and the reason that I do that is that I often find that people want to have a NED position, frankly, without always necessarily fully thinking through why or what that means, or is it sort of a hobby? Is it an interest? Are you approaching it as a nice to have sort of add on to your day job because you think it'll expand your horizons, or maybe it is, you know, something you aspire to go perhaps fully plural later in life or towards the tail end of a traditional career. And so I often find that the insights that I can provide very much related to where is the individual coming from. And if I were to be somewhat and maybe even controversial for a moment, I think people approach being a NED as a nice to have, almost like a little fun hobby thing that might even pay some fees or provide a bridge to something. And that's not really given the role kind of enough respect, in my opinion. And therefore, people that approach it that way end up getting what they deserve, which is not very much at all. Because actually, for the people who want and need NEDs, it's a very serious decision. For those that haven't been on boards previously, particularly, I work exclusively with investor-backed companies, so having an external investor certainly changes always the dynamic around the boardroom table. So the management and all the investors wanting to appoint a NED is a very deliberate act. It's not something that happens every year. So on the 7 boards on which I currently sit, we don't increase them. In fact, most people, as I'm sure you appreciate, want to keep boards lean and agile. They're things to be kept sort of optimally small, not large. And so my point is the decision to go out and create a new NED role is a very deliberate and very important decision for the company that's starting that search or opening that role up. And I think, therefore, if you're interested in that role, it needs to be matched with the same level of kind of gravitas with which the role has been created. And therefore, I generally find people haven't necessarily considered it in quite such a serious way. They haven't thought about the networking that one might do to have these sort of rare opportunities bubble up. They haven't really thought about their personal brand going into it. They may not realize that actually they look, to the eyes of a professional NED or a chairman, you might look like 1 in 5,000, right? And so, okay, there are 5,000 people out there. I mean, you know, jumping ahead to one of the questions that was asked in the group, you know, are marketing focused leaders of interest as NEDs? Yes, they are, but there's lots of them. In fact, actually, my wife Joanna is one of them, a classic enterprise CMO, decades of experience, great looking resume. But there's for argument's sake, there's 1,000 more of resumes that look just like that in the UK. So if there's going to be one great NED opportunity a year for which you'd be the perfect fit, and there's 1,000 of you that on paper kind of look the same, what are the chances that you either get approached for that role, and even if you are, what are the chances that you actually win that prize? So I think that's what I find is that there's actually a very high bar. It's quite aspirational. There are lots and lots of individuals who on paper could look sort of pre-qualified to be that NED. But you've got to go further in really understanding how, like in any, you know, it's a job, right? Why are you going to pick me? And I think that often starts much earlier around the personal brand, the networking, you know, the thought leadership. You know, there's nothing stopping us all picking a personal brand, blogging on it, speaking on it, doing pro bono mentoring, anything it takes to actually really rise above the crowd. So I think that's perhaps it is a long-winded answer, but I find I unpack quite a simple question, seeming and sort of innocent question, with actually the answer is it's a high bar, and if people approach it that way, then not only have they got a much higher probability when the right role comes along of getting it, but actually they'll build a reputation and a personal brand in the sector. And so go beyond, don't just be a marketing focused leader. You know, pick the industry. Are you demand gen? Are you channel? Are you strategic marketing, comms? Are you the marketing expert that's going to help them with their international expansion because their current marketing leader is domestic only. You've got to go to the next level and really figure out that value prop. And if you do that, the opportunities, dare I say, the opportunities will present themselves eventually.
Okay, that's interesting. Yes, you're recommending going quite focused, so not just a function, but a sector or a specialism within it. So let's assume you are properly committed and you're doing all these things. Um, Obviously, one might start with a personal network or kind of trusted intermediaries that you might know. But what do you think? We'll come back to sort of actually making an investment in the business that you might, be a NED of, because I know that's something that you've done, which I think is interesting. But outside of that, what do you hear about? There are various NEDs, indeed, paid NED communities. I think like New Role comes up, and there's a chap from I think NED on board in our group. There are various jobs boards. I guess there are sort of headhunters who place NEDs as well, recruitment sort of consultants. But what's your experience of those? Do you think that's a little bit hit and miss, and kind of it's easier to go via the personal connections?
Yes. So maybe if I elaborate on that, I mean, so a lot of the best roles. So none of my NED roles have ever been advertised. So maybe I put that out there as just sort of a statement of fact and work backwards from that. And so the boards now, there is actually I distinguish between my NED roles and a chair role. There is actually a chair role that I currently have that was advertised on New Role. So and this is not exactly Chatham House rules because it's being recorded,
Well, we don't have to publish it, or we can edit
no.
it maybe. But
Well, I can tell you a story because it's
hmm,
true. I don't think the other actors in it will be offended by it. So that was a particular role that was advertised, and it didn't sort of leap off the page at me. I was already quite busy. I'd taken on a couple of roles within that same year, and I think, giving yourself a ramp time as a NED of sort of 6 to 9 months to really, you want to spend as much time with a new business, really understand them, their team, their market, particularly if you're not already an expert in that particular domain. So I think when I take on multiple roles, I'm spacing out the new ones because you don't want to bite off more than you can chew. So at that time, I'd taken on a couple that year. I wasn't looking for anything new. The role was advertised on New Role. I saw it in the sort of weekly digest and I ignored it. But I have a brand. It was a B2B SaaS company, and I developed a personal brand within that space. And I actually got a call from somebody at New Role who'd been asked to call me by the investor that was leading the search, saying, "Why hasn't Martin applied?" And I say that not sort of being pretentious or anything, but part of the value then of having a personal brand is, okay, it was advertised on New Role. I just let it pass me by. It was only because of relationships and sort of personal brand awareness that they basically called me. I explained why I wasn't going to apply. They sort of talked me out of it and said, "Here's why you should apply." And I did. So was that New Role? Yes, but it was also still connection and brand. The other thing I would say is that once it's a bit like a hot stock. Once everybody knows about it, all the money's been made. And so once a NED rolls out on LinkedIn or New Role, you can expect there might be hundreds. You could certainly expect hundreds of applicants on New Role, and possibly on LinkedIn there might be thousands. So once again, it's a good place before you have the network, because obviously networks and brand take time to build. Then finding advertised positions then makes that accessible to you. But once again, understand that's going to be a quantity play. If you're seeing it, the chances are hundreds or thousands of other applicants are seeing it. So going back to my first point, if you haven't already figured out how you're going to stand out from a crowd of 1,000 applicants, you're going to hear what I hear, and I think we've even seen it in our forum. I applied, I heard nothing. I applied, I applied for 5, I got nothing, I heard nothing. And there's a CV and a few paragraphs of text. It's really going to be really, really hard to stand out. And if they get thousands of applicants, they're only likely to take 5 or 10 through to interview. So once again, keep asking yourself, how am I going to be one of those 5 or 10 out of thousands that even get to the interview? Some of that may be based on your application. Some of it may be based on people then looking back at your LinkedIn, looking on your social. Are you a thought leader? Are you an expert? Have you been a NED before? Have you published a book? Do you speak? Do you do anything at all to stand out from the crowd? And frankly, if you don't, why would I shortlist you when I'm a chairman on the other side doing that kind of search? How do you get on my shortlist?
Okay. So yes, it sounds like then, investing in, well, your personal brand, getting that out there, building reputation, personal networks, and things like that are the place to focus. But then still, there are opportunities that well, like you say, you saw the thing in your role, if you didn't apply for it. One of the Justine Gillen asked earlier in the Guild group about how much experience do you need, and also, as you referenced, asking whether marketing focused leaders are of interest to as NEDs. Which I guess your answer is yes, they are, but there are loads of people chasing those roles, so you need to stand out, as you say. Just on the experience thing, then, it sounds like you're saying that you need expertise, but it's not necessarily, I mean, you don't need 20 years or 10 years, or, I mean, I'm guessing it depends a bit on the scarcity of that expertise, and maybe you can, get NED roles even being relatively, with less years of experience. But if you've got experience that's really in demand, then you don't need to be in your 50s, 60s, or whatever to get the roles. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it is about fit. So I've got I'm an investor in a social purpose business. I'm not on the board, but the founder of that business, Joe, is 25. And actually, we were having one of our regular catch ups, and I think he's done or is doing several NED roles at 25,
Mm.
right? So he doesn't have a lot of experience. He is a real sort of thought leader in that social purpose, social enterprise kind of space. He did a really interesting kind of pilot project at university. He's very good at working the media. His name is Joe Seddon, Seddon. Google him. He's on the BBC, the Times, and it's working class background. Nothing other than hard work and focus and determination. And Joe took a project that he started at Oxford University and has turned it into a business. So he's got a very strong personal brand. He's walked the talk in terms of being able to take a college level project through to a commercial enterprise, and then with effort and charisma, you get some mainstream media coverage, and therefore in that particular niche, if you want a young sort of digital native millennial who's passionate on social purpose and the sort of the stakeholders of the future, and and all this, and access to education, and how to in their case get kids with underprivileged backgrounds into top tier universities. It's really a very, very specific thing he's doing. But I would say he's the only, and I look into that space as a result of my investment in his company. He's the guy. I mean, there's no one. If you want someone to come and, maybe you've got a stalish board of old fogies and fuddy duddies that don't really understand social purpose, and they don't really understand it between shareholders and stakeholders, and they really want to think about becoming a B Corp and what does this mean to millennials. He's your guy all day long, right? So it's very, very
Yeah.
specific, but he's done the work, and and he does those roles. I don't actually know whether they're remunerated or not, because as an aspiring entrepreneur, he finds that a very enriching experience. So he's learning a lot whilst running his own company by working with these other entities. So once again, a bit of a long answer. So that had nothing to do with experience, nothing you would ever measure in years.
Yeah.
It helps at the end of the day. People are hiring you for your advice. I don't know about you folks. If you're hiring a lawyer or a financial advisor, right? If someone comes in and say, "I qualified last week, I'll tell you how to invest your £1 million inheritance," or someone's been the family financial advisor for 35 years, who are you going to choose? So I think in the advice business, experience, tenure, success is always key, but it isn't always measured in years.
Okay. I'll ask our attendees in a minute if they've got a question, but I'll ask one more, and that is about money, because I think sometimes, like you were saying in the beginning, it might be you think, oh, this NED lark's going to be easy money, just rock up for a board meeting once a month and cash it, But I'm interested how much you can expect to earn, and also whether there are costs. I mean, it's sort of you don't really think about costs, but are there costs, like even if it's time, but in self-promotion, for example, or training, as in personal self-development and training, or money that you should keep aside to invest in the potential businesses that you're going to be advising. So yeah, just the sort of realistic earning, the sort of financial side. So how, and I guess as part of that, some of it's pay that you might get, basic pay that you might get, but some of it equally could be equity, or more rarely performance or sort of bonus type remuneration structures.
Yeah, well, as you know, Ash, I think there's a whole chapter in the book on that. So let me try to unpack that in 5 minutes, because there's a lot to the question. A lot of my friends who went plural before me started off in unpaid roles, right? So they did their time at least unpaid in cash terms, and so I don't think it's not uncommon to start there. It's also not uncommon to be, say for my world is early stage tech, and so before there's any institutional funding, if I come across a very early stage business that's been bootstrapped, angel funded, crowd funded, it's very unlikely that they have the money to pay board fees, and frankly they shouldn't. I mean, at that stage, when it's all super scrappy and the founder's barely taking a salary, why should us advisors rock up and if there were £12,000 in fees to be had at that stage, frankly, I'd rather kept that £12,000 and invested it in growing the business. So in my world, I draw a little bit of a line there that once institutional funding has come in, it is very appropriate to pay board fees, not least because this isn't a secret. A lot of funds out there of a certain kind charge board monitoring fees. So they'll make an investment, they'll have an investment director at, so they'll have a seat and probably an observer right, and they will charge an amount of money per annum to cover the cost of their investment director. Some do, some don't. It's a hot topic, but it's increasingly common. So not only is there a little bit more money to pay board fees after an institutional round, but if the investor is taking a fee, then the rest of us, if we've been working pro bono or just for options, it's a pretty legitimate moment to say, okay, well, you charge 20K a year in fee, and we're all doing the same job around the boardroom table, so we'll all have 20K, please. So that's I've seen that happen. I would say that I've seen people sort of want to go plural and then step back, because part of going plural was a career transition, and therefore within some reasonable amount of time they need to be earning a salary akin to what it is they need to earn. May not be as much as it was if they were coming out the C-suite or something, but most people still need to earn a salary. And because it can take time, it might you might spend a year before you find the first NED role that's right for you, and it might be another year before you find the second. And if each of those, even if they were paying, if they paid 10 or 20K a year in fees, that's not very much money, right? You're 2 years in, you're making 30K a year, 40K a year, right? That's probably not what you were used to earning before, and probably not covering cost of living. And then you have to give up, right? Then you say, well, actually, I can't afford to build a portfolio. Whereas if you end up with 6 roles that were each paying, I don't know, £20,000 a year, for example, now you're earning 120K in fees. Well, respectfully, most people can live on that, right? So I've also seen that where people have gone in, probably because there's so little written about this. Is just that's why I wrote the book, right? I wrote the book that I wish I could have read when I'd started. because there's literally no similar literature on the topic. So I was asking friends, and I was blessed to have a network where I could ask all these awkward questions like money and time and equity and all that stuff, but no one had written about it. So I think some people have got into this without knowing, because how could they know? Because they couldn't have anybody to ask, and there was nothing they could read, and there weren't forums like we have now, and then have realized no, they just sort of, they can't afford to do it. Equity investing is quite common in tech. It's usually expected with a chairman role, and particularly if that chair is being, not appointed by the investor, but investors typically want a non-exec chair to come in to add to the governance and stewardship after an institutional round. Then investors want a chair that's willing to invest their money and their time, because it sort of sorts out the wheat from the chaff, but also it creates a sense of alignment. So everybody sitting around that boardroom table at that moment is an equity shareholder. It would be odd to be a chairperson. I could have 8 people around a boardroom table, and they could all be investors and shareholders, and I wouldn't be.
Yeah.
That's sort of a funny place to want to kind of chair from a position of we're all in this together. And then I have a philosophical point of view around sort of future earnings. So particularly here in early stage businesses, because of our wonderful kind of EIS, VCT, the tax advantage investment structures that we have here, then it's very tax efficient to make EIS qualifying investments, or even SEIS qualifying in very early stage, which is a capital gains rather than income tax. And if you hold those for 3 years, it's zero capital gains. So if you can afford to, I'd much rather be getting my future returns from equity-based investments at 0% capital gains tax. Whereas as a higher rate income taxpayer, which I've always been, earning a 12K fee on a 55% marginal what's the point? Once again, it nets out so little to me. I'd rather keep the 12K gross in the company and try to use it to help grow the business a bit faster. So there's also sort of that classic income tax versus capital gains. And if it's very early stage and you get the tax advantage, then the ultimate rewards from going on that journey will be much greater that route than just taking fees.
And I mean, just as very crude benchmarks, my sense is that the outside of free things, if it's an early stage business but which has got institutional investment, like you say, that you might be expected to be earning somewhere between, say, £1,000 to £2,000 a month, i.e., sort of 12 to 24K a year. I mean, very roughly. Whereas a PLC, for example, PLC NED is what, 35 to 50 or something. I mean, it's
At least.
considerably more.
Yes.
Yeah, and can be more than that.
Yeah, and
So
I won't go into fees, but I'm quite happy, and I might even have said it in the book. When I started, I decided that I wanted to end, once this first portfolio was built, at a blend. If this were a consultancy business, I wanted to have a blended day rate of £2,000 a day, and I do.
yeah, okay. There's a question here from our attendees, of which there are 8. I can't see them all on the screen, but from Robin Carswell. Robin, it looks like you've got your camera on, but your mic off. Do you want to ask your question as in live, or I can just read it out?
I think Robin meant it's quite a noisy environment, so I think
Oh,
he's
okay.
sparing us from that.
Okay, yes, fair enough, Robin. So the question was, can you comment on advice to board? I consult in digital transformation at exco level. I would like to understand the nuance of board advisor versus NED in situ.
I think there is one way to answer it. There is a roundedness that allows you to really participate and add value at board level. Now, in my past career, I also expected the same from my senior leadership team. So even if someone in a senior leadership team comes to a meeting, they are the functional representative. I expect the head of sales, head of marketing, head of finance to promote their agenda, to go to bat for their resources, but then I expect them to be able to stop doing that and join in the leadership team discussion, if that makes sense. And I think it's similar to a board. We may all be there for sort of a particular reason, and we may even be deferred to. I often am the sales and marketing guy, on the board. And I'm also the tech guy, but all of my businesses are tech, so everybody generally has a tech background. And so that, there may be moments where they'll defer to me on that topic. However, that would be unusual. I probably only actually spend 5-10% of my time ever sort of postulating on my sales and marketing and go-to-market expertise. The other 90%, I have to be able to engage in every other conversation, every other topic that's happening at board. Now, clearly, some of that comes with practice and experience, but I think some of it comes from mindset of either am I that well rounded already, or what might I read, or where might I hang out, or what is it I could do between now and being on that board, where I can be both a digital transformation specialist, but also be able to add value in general. I mean, we're not talking, we're never going to be within the weeds of the marketing demand gen engine, like the marketing expert or the CFO is on treasury. We not have to be, but we do have to be able to sort of keep up and then gradually contribute beyond just our functional area of expertise. So that's a big difference.
And presumably also there are legal differences. So if you're just advising the board as a consultant, you don't perhaps at the same level of, like as a non-exec director or as any kind of director, there are all sorts of legal things and duties and responsibilities that you have that you might not have as a just as an advisor.
That's true. I mean, maybe I answer a question that kind of creates in my mind. I think that's overplayed and over dramatified in my experience. I think the reason for that is the governance and the legal responsibility and the Companies Act and the Code of Conduct. It's the only thing that other people can teach.
Yeah.
And so therefore you go to the IOD or someone and say, let's go on, and it will be packed with that stuff because that's the stuff they can teach, right? It's simple to teach, it's standard, it's generic, it's applicable. And I think that creates a misimpression outside of PLC. I don't do public companies, right? And that's a very conscious decision. I never did in my career. I never wanted to be the officer of a publicly traded company, especially not one in the US. And as someone that's always been in tech, there's always a big US exposure, as Mike Lynch and others are feeling the wrath of now. And even when I went plural here, I said I wouldn't. I looked at a few things, and now I deliberately haven't. And then it's mainly that point: it is a whole nother world. So in private companies, yes, you can't be reckless. Yes, you are liable. Yes, you do need good governance, but just don't be a crook, right? I mean, at the end of the day, if you're just a decent human being, and the board behaves in the right way and discusses the right things and documents it, and several of my tiny companies have gone into real cash management mode. We've gone to weekly cash calls. We haven't called an administrator, but we sort of had a free 1 hour consultation with an administrator when it gets hairy. Do all of that. Listen, learn, document it. Ask yourself, are we overtrading? Why are we a going concern? Do we have clear line of sight to investment or the overdraft? Are we taking on a piece of new customer business that we can't actually deliver? Are we going to make payroll, right? All the basic stuff of just being a good business person and being honest and ethical. And everything else sort of takes care of itself. So I think there is a misnomer there, this risk of being a NED and it's safer to be just an advisor. I don't actually, it's not my personal opinion. It's not my conclusion from
That's
all of this
interesting.
experience.
I guess as well, there's a
And sorry, final,
yeah.
just take out your own good D&O insurance just in case. And don't be a crook, be insured. Everything will be fine.
I guess as well to your point about maybe people over worrying, is that a big part of the point of a good NED surely is to challenge and be a bit provocative, even risk taking, and therefore if you're being overly conservative, you risk not doing your adding value.
Yeah, well, so I think challenge, and that comes back to also the question about, so what did I need to learn? So from operator to influencer, and if you don't already have them, really developing those soft skills of being able to influence and convince, is a marked different from any kind of executive role that would have gone before. But I think if you got a good chairperson, I mean that would be another top tip. If you were blessed to have the option, if you had sort of several opportunities, particularly for the first NED role, I'd absolutely want to understudy under a really good chairperson, someone that gave me that vibe, because there is quite a lot to learn on the job that no course or book or anything else is really going to teach you. And therefore going into it knowing that whatever you did before, whatever level of success or status or corporate level gives you the sort of credentials and credibility to be considered as an advisor, understand that you're starting now at the bottom rung of a new ladder, and think about, where am I going to understudy? How am I going to learn? Where is the right place? Where the right league to play with the right kind of coaching that's really going to help me progress the quickest. And so I was blessed to have that. I suppose actually coincidentally when I took my first role, and that watching a great chairperson at work is just absolutely priceless. And then finding that balance on their agenda for when are we being governance orientated, and then when are we on strategic topics, or you can separate them. Tomorrow I'm hosting a 1-day offsite annual strategy day, right? So as chairperson, I can blend that in our board meetings, but also I don't only have to have board meetings, I can have strategy sessions, keeping all of that governance stuff out of the way for a day, so we can really go in and challenge and brainstorm the leadership team on what their plans are for the next year.
Okay. Does anyone have a question here that they want to put? Either you can put it in the chat box or ask it live. I mean, I've got other ones I'm happy to ask, but if anyone's got a burning question. No, happy to listen. Okay, I'll ask. Oh, someone is that John? Did you have something?
Yeah,
Stuttering a little bit. The
Text a little funky.
try it. No, I can't. Well, you could try. I can't quite hear you, John. Sometimes, maybe if you type the message into the chat box, that should be get through. Your audio's coming through a bit stuttery for me. In the meantime, I just wanted, because I saw you posted the poll, Martin, around diversity, or having someone on the board to sort of help with that. Diversity and sustainability, among other things, are very hot topics at the moment. And I'm wondering what you think, whether what you see as your responsibilities to push those on the agenda as a NED.
Yeah, so with my chairman hat on, therefore, the makeup around the boardroom table is primarily my responsibility. And if I look around the table and think, I've inherited a board of a certain composition, then I feel it's beholden on me to do something about that. I'm obviously going to need the CEO, founder, investor, director. I'm going to need major support, but I think you got to drive the change that you want to see in the world. So the reason I asked that poll is I've been asking myself over the summer. I mean, because I won't do token diversity. And where I've got into conversations with friends and colleagues around the industry and other board directors, one of the objections, excuses for the lack of diversity is therefore the qualified candidates, right? It's the chicken and egg. It's kind of like, even if we made a deliberate sort of positive hire, then the pool of people that have the experience and skills, expertise, and bring in that diversity of thought, whether that be age or gender or ethnicity, whatever it might be that we're looking to bring into our diversity of thought, I'm immediately told there's a lack of candidates. Now, it doesn't matter. I don't know whether that's true or not. I'm just sort of fed up hearing it. And so I think about, okay, well, if that is an access issue, right? If it is chicken and egg, what might be the solution? Because if we can't grow the pool of candidates, if we can't provide access, a bit like I was saying with my social purpose business, if you don't, why are Oxford and Cambridge are students with underprivileged backgrounds underrepresented? If you can't go back and fix that and understand what those obstacles are and take them away, then you won't get more students coming through no matter what you do. So I've asked myself, how might we give more people with many and varied backgrounds just access to board work, the work experience, if you will. So I've come up with this idea of a rotating board apprentice role, which I've yet to enact. I'm kind of, this sort of a thought experiment that says, can I convince my boards to have, say, at any one moment in time, an apprentice that would be most analogous to the sort of board observer role that maybe, so say, an institutional investor will often have the senior investment director and an observer. And that's how they train their young people when they bring their kind of hot MBAs into their investment firm and they're trying to bring them up to investment director level. This is how they learn. They get to ride shotgun in those board meetings as an observer, which doesn't mean they're not allowed to say anything, but obviously it does mean they don't have voting power. So I think there's precedent that institutional investors get to apprentice their associates with this board observer role, but the rest of the world doesn't. And so that's why I asked the question, and it's just beginning to just kind of test this and build it out and see, maybe, supply and demand. It's going to be like any double-sided marketplace. I've got to find enough boards, mine and others, that will be willing to go with me on the journey to create the demand. But then I've also got to talk to people about where is the supply source. If we're doing so this open access program into these rotating broad apprentice roles, where might we promote those? Who might we partner with? Who's got similar goals and aspirations, whether it be charities or whatnot. So I was encouraged to see that it's a crude, simple question. A couple of answers. It's not, any of my polling friends would say that was a terribly phrased question and set of answers, but it wasn't meant to be super scientific. It just I'm on the side of right or wrong here, and could we build a bit of momentum around this idea? And I was encouraged to see that just sort of, I guess, off the top of people's heads, maybe like 75% actually thought, yeah, it's either very likely or possible. Is you're not mad. We did get a 13% never and a 7% depends, and I just sort of threw those in to calibrate.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea, and it was quite encouraging to see those results, even on a sort of smallish set of respondents. But we've got with John has asked a question, but John, I'm going to suggest we do that in the guild group, because we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to try and sort of stick to time. And I wanted to ask you, Martin, just to finish, whether in your 5-ish years of experience, as far as I worked it out of being a NED, whether you've seen any particular changes, and also in terms of trends, and also looking forwards, I guess, apart from some of those ideas, where your idea around that apprentice thing, are there any obvious trends? Because, I mean, for example, with us now being used to remote working, it feels to me like maybe you could be a NED for someone, for a business in South America, or like anywhere in the world, for example, that's will that happen more? Whereas historically it used to be physical meetings, and so you used to have some kind of proximity geographically. So yeah, just intrigued to know about whether you've seen any big changes, and looking forwards, whether you think there's any particular trends.
Well, I'd say the big change is, I think, the concept of a NED, once again, both on the supply and demand side, it's growing in awareness and popularity. So part of the reason I do what I do, whether it be helping to host a group or do sessions like this or speak on panels, partly it is about raising awareness. I'm on a personal mission. I want to encourage as many people as possible of the right profile to do this. You know, it is usually, at least it's considered at the moment, to be a latter stage career thing. Now, you know, maybe that's incompatible with some of the other things we said about experience and diversity, but let's separate those two for a moment. So I think I get asked about it a lot more. I think it's gone from being very niche and obscure. I hope it'll enter the mainstream. It's not there yet, and because I think that the richer base of diverse, you know, non-exec assistants that we can provide our startups and scale-ups in particular. PLCs have never had an issue with this. Whether their NEDs add any value or not is perhaps a topic for a session on another day. So I hope that trend continues. I don't think the future of work thing really changes very much. I think this is a very personal, trusted, mentory type relationship, particularly with founders and CEOs in early stage companies. There's times I've literally had to go on a train and go and put my arm around them. In fact, that's not unusual at all. So I think the proximity thing, to be honest with you, I don't see, from my perspective, I don't see that changing anytime soon. In fact, everybody's desperate. I've got a pent up demand for face to face right now after this last 18 months. So we're reverting absolutely back to in person as quickly as we can because of the intimacy and the one-to-one nature, you know, with founders as well as around the board.
Yeah. We've got a question from Robin, but I'll paste that in. I'll post it to the Guilds group afterwards, because we've come to the end of our time, and I imagine people might want to get a coffee or go to do whatever before their next meeting, which might be kicking off at 4. So thanks everyone for coming along. I think there's 8 people that came, which is, I mean, we had no idea. We thought no one might turn up, so that's good. And obviously, particular thanks to Martin. And if there are any things we didn't cover, then do just ask them in the thread on Guild, and we can. And the nice thing is, then we kind of capture the replies and knowledge and expertise in a way you don't quite in event chat. So I'll stop recording now as well.